Am I the asshole for staying at my son's wedding after he referred to his grandmother as the most important woman in his life, even though my wife was his stepmom most of his life? My son got married a month ago, and ever since then tensions have been high with my wife and her parents. My wife and I married after the death of my first wife. Our son was 6 when she died, but our relationship had been over for a couple of years before she passed. We had stayed legally married for a while and tried to keep up pretenses for the sake of our son. But we both met people we wanted to be with, and then my first wife died. I continued to see my wife, the woman I had met and wanted to be with. But I did not introduce her to my son for another year, and I saw her far less for several months while I focused on my son and helping him through the loss of his mom. My son was 7 when he met my wife, and I admit my wife and I married quickly. He was a few weeks shy of 8 years old, and he struggled with my wife being part of our lives. He was still in therapy, but we also did some group therapy together with a different therapist. He was respectful to her but emotionally distant. He was not affectionate and did not love her. Over time, she did take on more parental responsibility, but we didn't jump straight into that. I didn't marry her to pawn my son off on someone else like some men do. I was always engaged in my son's life, and I always parented. He always turned to his grandmother, his mom's mom. He would call her regularly and would turn to her if I wasn't around, and he was upset about something. He would see her as often as he could. And eventually, per the advice of the therapist, and after talking to my wife about how she was struggling, doing all the parental things but him being emotionally distant with her, I decided she should try to fill more of a friend, aunt kind of role, and not that of a parent. She wasn't okay with it at first, but then admitted it would wear on her if he never returned her love or see him as a mom to him. And he was clear in therapy that he didn't want her as his second mom. He wanted nobody as that. Fast forward to the wedding, and during the toasts, my son thanked me and my wife and his grandmother, and he mentioned his mom and how she was always his number one, but how after she died, his grandmother was the most important woman in his life until he met his wife, and how they both loved her. My wife became very upset upon hearing this. She told me she wanted to leave once the speeches were done. I told her I didn't want to leave my son's wedding. She asked how I could stay when he showed how much he doesn't really value her or love her. She left. I stayed. And she ended up at her parents' house. When I got home, she told me she felt abandoned, and her parents told me I was a bad husband and I should have put my son in his place, and told him only one living woman deserved to be declared the most important woman in his life, besides his wife, and that was my wife. They feel I should have left with her because the ceremony was over and it was just the reception. Am I the asshole?